Welcome to the Spot On Insurance Podcast, brought to you by Insurance Licensing Services of America, ILSA. This is Ted Tavares.
And this is Arlene Tavares coming to you from beautiful Puerto Rico. Today, we'll be taking a closer look at a topic that affects every single one of us.
But before we get started, don't forget to click on the subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. And now here's our host, Doug Foresta.
Hello and welcome to Spot On Insurance. This is your host, Doug Foresta. Today with me is Kelly Donahue-Piro. We're going to be discussing proactive renewal calls, decreasing stress and increasing coverage, policies, and retention. Kelly is the founder and president of Agency Performance Partners and the co-founder of Agency Appeal. Kelly Donahue-Piro, welcome to Spot On Insurance.
I'm so glad that you could have me today and look forward to educating your listening public.
Thank you so much. And I know people are going to get a lot out of this episode. The first thing that we're going to discuss is this idea that proactivity improves customer experience. Can you explain a little bit about, first of all, what do you mean by proactivity? And then how does it improve customer experience?
Sure. It's a great question to start off with. Well, first of all, I think that in today's world, we have a very interesting dynamic that's going on where I can go online and see ratings about any business in America, right? So now when I'm looking for recommendations, strangers tell me who to go to. And I always use this example of if you're looking for a new dentist, maybe your dentist is retiring and you do a Google search of who's in your area, you see one dentist with 12 reviews at 5-star, one with 5 reviews with 3 stars, and one with just no reviews. Who do you think you're going to select? Who would you choose?
Well, right. I'm gonna choose the one with the most reviews and the most stars. Absolutely.
And so in today's environment, what we really have to do is force ourselves to thinking of what is 5-star service. And I think for a lot of agencies, we go into, we say, we give great service, we give great service, we give great service, but they can't define what that means. And our struggle is always this, is that if you look at me and you look at my mother, for example, our definition of great service is very different. But there's one unifying fact through all of insurance, and that is that being proactive is the key to your success. So if you think uniformly across, every generation, what's the one thing that, can unify your customers? And that is being proactive. That's reaching out to people, asking them if they have questions, making recommendations, confirming their insurance is accurate. And if we're not proactive in going out to them, we have to remember when they get their renewal in the mail and they go home and watch TV with their family, they're getting hit with Geico, Progressive, State Farm. If we're not proactively driving that relationship, building that relationship, and adding value, all we're doing is giving 3-star service, which is very neutral, very blah.
So can you explain some of the key techniques that are involved in being proactive when working on renewal calls? Like, what would that look like?
Absolutely. So what we do, and we always say that, we have to reach out to our customers once per year at a minimum. And the renewal is a great time because there's a volatility that happens. They're going to get a new price in the mail. And unfortunately, when they get the new price in the mail, let's be honest, there's probably also the Christmas credit card bill that hasn't been paid off.
Right.
Maybe they need new snow tires and their son wants to go on a school field trip. And all of these things are happening in American families. By the way, it's the same thing in a business, sometimes even harder, because you get your audit in the mail and you're like, what? Why do I have to pay another $1,500 in insurance? All I did was grow.
Yes.
And it's 6 months later, what is going on? You just comes out of nowhere. And so it's, to me, like the basics are, it's like, let's call everybody. Let's call them when we get the download of the renewal. And we can say, hey, got your renewal, want to check in with you. Let's start by confirming your contact information. Let's make sure we have everything accurate. We kind of have a list of questions that the agents to go through. Following it up with, what are your plans for the next year? Because this is when you're going to find out, we're going to put an addition on. My teenager is going to start driving. We're opening a new location. All of those things that cue you in as an insurance person to put a suspense or a memo in to follow up. I'm going to follow up you 6 months, see if you've sold your home yet, or see if you're buying that new home. Because that means that we're going to drive our services to them versus them having to come out and find us. Because we know when there's a change, there's volatility. We might lose them. They may go elsewhere. They may go to their mortgage broker's insurance guy. Or if they buy a new vehicle, more and more, there's insurance agencies and car dealerships.
Right.
So we also recommend during that call that you're always making one recommendation for increased coverage and one other policy. And it's funny where people really have insurance become this order taker mentality where I call you and say, I need a quote on my auto. You might say, Kelly, can you get your home too? And we end it there. We don't talk about the flood. We don't talk about the earthquake. We don't talk about the life insurance. We don't talk about any of that stuff. And what happens is that we fall into that price trap because it's easy, 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 easy. Well, I can tell you right now, we've been watching the news, obviously. A client I had on the phone this morning, his brother hasn't had power. That's 3 weeks ago now.
Wow.
So when you're really looking at that, do you think those people care if, they wanted their agent to give them flood insurance? Whether they said yes or no, that's in their court. But if we're not recommending it on these renewal calls, it's really tough. And what the renewal calls do as well is it finds mistakes before they become volcanoes, right? So when you have a mistake that now you're on the phone with an underwriter for 2 hours, you're stressed out, you're trying to figure out how to fix it. Well, if you're looking at these accounts proactively, you'll be able to catch those mistakes and rectify them before they become huge issues. So that's kind of our strategy is call everybody once a year, do a real account review, build that relationship. And one other thing we always recommend, which is my favorite, have a space in your management system to write down the stuff, the dog's name, the kid's name, where they go on vacation. So that way next time you call next year, it's like, hey, how's Roxy? How's your dog doing? And that just tends to bring that conversation so much farther away from price to really unique and authentic communication with your customers. And that's when you really get to the good stuff.
So then the customer feels like you actually called me as a person, right? Not just a policy that you
Exactly.
Now, I know that you said,
Exactly. And
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, and not just that, that we get the common thing when people start making these calls, like people call me, I made my payment. Why are you calling me?
Right.
So can you imagine?
Yeah. The only reason you would call me is,
because I'm late on my payment, or what are you trying to sell me? And it's like, that's the negative connotation this industry has. And we don't fight against that. The kids of this next generation aren't going to know that independent agents are even around because they don't have this cool look to them anymore.
Now, you said that one of the things that I believe is true, and tell me if this is, if I'm wrong here, but being proactive actually increases retention. Is that correct?
Yeah, 100%. Because if you're taking a rate increase, let's just say, would you rather get a phone call with somebody trying to work it out with you? Or would you rather get it in the mail and be like, what?
Right.
And, the other problem is that if I bought insurance from you 3 years ago, if I haven't needed anything, I haven't had any communication with you. And, with the advent of EFT now, it comes out of my bank account, but I see my carrier names. There's not a strong branding of that independent agent any longer. They had a phone call transaction that maybe lasted a half hour, 45 minutes in total.
Right.
Between, getting the information and presenting the quote and selling it. Well, 3 years later, I don't remember my agent's name, not unless they work at staying in touch with me. So when that rate increase comes up, I think this is all you have. I go elsewhere.
Have you seen data about, how much it increases retention or, what the difference is?
Yeah, we see on average about 2% increase. We've seen gusts up to 4%. So, from 88 to 92% in as little as 4 to 6 months. That's a huge bump. If your retention is more around the 90%, you're probably looking at 92%.
Yeah.
And then we have advanced strategies that get you up to the 94, 95% that include a lot more marketing, a lot more staying in contact with your customers, really getting your marketing budget in alignment with retention. But it definitely 100% works. The only time we see it backfire in full transparency is when the quality of the call deteriorates. So I give you a call and I say, hey, how's it going? Anything changed? Okay, great. I'm going to get off the phone now. Bye.
Right, because that's not really a proactive call, right? You're not really probing. You're not asking me what my needs are. You're kind of, you just pop up. And then probably at that point, I would imagine it's almost, then it could become an annoyance, right? Where people are like, well, why'd you call me?
It is because people are like, well, why? What's the scoop? And then they get their rate in the mail and they realize it went up $500. Like, you didn't talk to me about this?
Right.
It's like, we don't, okay, well, if you're not going to bring it up, I'm not going to bring it up, because no one wants to talk about it. So, we always just say, hey, you have to have an authentic, real conversation with people. And if it's just something that you're trying to check off your list of things to do, you do have the opportunity because that's like a real, hey, 3-star, maybe 2.5-star experience And that can really turn people off into the other way. And, there was this saying forever in insurance, that we don't call people because that's waking the sleeping giant. Well, you're waking the sleeping giant with an unauthentic experience, and that's going to hurt you. So you have to have a standard on these calls that's really authentic, amazing, and helpful to the consumer.
Spot on Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier licensing and regulatory compliance experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. At the very beginning, I mentioned that we were going to discuss decreasing stress, which is not something that you necessarily typically hear in the insurance industry. So can you explain how, you're saying that making proactive renewal calls is the number one way to reduce stress long term. What do you mean by that?
Well, when you're not proactive, what happens is that your team sort of runs an obstacle course every day. So the phone rings and it's problem, quote, problem. Because no one calls their insurance agent to say thank you. It's just not the world we live in, right?
Right.
So it's a problem with a bill, problem with a claim, problem with a rate. And so all day long, they become the complaint center versus really, truly being agents. And so what we see is by getting proactive, you slow down those inbound calls because you're in control. You're in the driver's seat of the interaction. I would say it's so much harder if when I call Verizon, because Verizon is one of the companies that I can't stand, but I pay a lot of money to.
Yes, I pay a lot of money to them as well. Yep, I'm with you.
Yeah. So it's like I call Verizon and, I'm not happy. Like, I'm in control of that conversation because they have to talk me off the ledge. But if they called me and said, hey, Kelly, I want to call you. We found some savings in your bill. I'd like to talk to you about it.
Right.
How different is that conversation?
Right. Absolutely.
Dramatic. That, and what we see is we see a reduction in remarket, which is huge. So especially in personal lines, we have become a remarketing industry, which means that we just shop everything because it's easier to shop it than explain to the customer the rate increase and talk to them about their options. So it's just, we'll shop it. I shop it. I shoot you an email and say, here's your new rate. And again, that experience is very unmemorable, if sometimes insulting, because it's kind of like, why didn't you do this? Why did I have to call you this whole time? So what we find is that when you can reduce reshops, you're in control. The quality of the conversation with the customer is so much better. You're not getting yelled at as much. It definitely reduces stress.
Yeah, as you said that, I think about, was it Stephen Covey in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People talked about that, that's one of the habits, be proactive. And I could see how it takes you out of that spiral of just reacting to, like you said, when people are calling you, those inbound calls for the most part aren't necessarily calls about thank you so much for saving me all this money on my on my policy. It's usually when they have some problem that they're calling in.
Right, and there's no relationship then to support that problem. So
right.
The only time they call in is with a question or a concern, and so there's nothing to counterbalance that. They're not like, unless they have a claim, and this is where agencies tend to shine. Is, hey, if they have a claim, that's great, but let's also be honest. Very few people in your book of business are going to have a claim that really changes their life. So I'm not talking about a fender bender or glass claim. I'm talking about like a real claim where you go to bat for them so they don't have a point of reference on it.
Spot on Insurance is sponsored by ILSA, Insurance Licensing Services of America, America's premier licensing and regulatory compliance experts. To learn more about ILSA and the services they provide, visit ilsainc.com. Now let's talk about account rounding as well. So another thing that I know that you talk about is that providing structure for your team helps with account rounding. Can you explain that?
So one of the strategies that every agency loves to tackle is selling more of their current book because they've said yes to you already, which is excellent. But we find a lot of times that, people's days get busy. And I'm going to tell you, I hate the word busy. I think we shall be productive, not busy. And so it's like they go in these meetings and say, account round. Well, unless like that premier opportunity falls in their lap, just like asking for a referral, we should all do it. But unless we see like the sun is shining and it's beautiful and there's this clear shot, somebody's going to say yes. We just don't do it that often. Well, with the renewal calls, one of our requirements is that you make a recommendation for one increase in one other line of coverage. So now if we're calling 5 people a day, well, say we get 3 of them on the phone, 3 people are getting recommended another line. Some of account rounding is just a numbers game. The more people we talk about it, the more it's going to happen. So now we've put into their day a spot to talk about other lines of coverage. Whereas before we're relying on a team, mostly service people, to get that call, which again, if they're not proactive, could be, I need to reinstate my insurance. I paid it, but it didn't go through, and now I'm 3 days late. Well, how are you going to account around that person? It's like, hey, great news. Let's talk about your umbrella insurance. No one wants to do it. They want to make that payment, get off the phone. But now by being proactive, there's a better space, better quality, better training. And, the clarity to see, because you're not just looking up an account on the fly, but there's the opportunity to prepare to talk to the person, as opposed to, I'm calling in, I need what I need, and I want to get off the phone with you. And so the preparation leads to a greater amount of account rounding.
I actually have had this experience as a consumer, and it's a good experience. I had my agent called me for the care of my auto policy, and they said, we've been looking at your auto policy, and, we've been looking at everything, and we think that we can do better, and here's what we suggest. And they just called me. They called me and they explained it all to me, and it made a big difference. I have to say, from the consumer side, it made a big difference in terms of how I feel about that agent, and actually seeing them as a resource rather than, just take my policy and I'll see you next year.
Well, and I think it's also fair enough to say, we talk about my mom a lot in training. So she's 70 years old. She's a school teacher. We use all these insurance terms. My mom's got no idea. But she's too embarrassed, really, to tell you she doesn't know what comprehensive coverage is.
Right.
And so, but she also doesn't know that she needs an umbrella, because that's just not something people think about.
Right. She's like, it's not raining.
Well, she said that to me once, and I was like, Mom, it's okay. I got it. And so you're sitting there thinking, like, my mom really needs an umbrella. Like, who's going to ask her about that?
Right.
And, it's the agent's responsibility ethically to talk about it. And I get it. We're all busy. But you know what? If my mom hit somebody today and she's got to go live in an apartment and she has her house taken away, don't you think she wouldn't want to know about a $250 umbrella?
Definitely.
And she might have said no to you, but the point is not no. The point is educating people and sometimes planting seeds that we see pay off 2-3 years from now.
And I would imagine that, part of the issue is, again, if you're making a proactive call, you have the time and space to educate people. But tell me if I'm off base here, but if you're responding, if you're just waiting till people are calling in about some other problem, they're probably not as open to that consumer education, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And I think that when you start getting the communications going, and, you're reviewing things, you're talking about, is your wedding ring listed on your policy?
Right.
You start adjusting people's payroll in commercial size. They're not getting a surprise audit that knocks them off their chair. Those are the things where it's now we're open to communication on it. One of the things we've been telling our agencies, how about just say, hey, with the advent of all these hurricanes and earthquakes and cyber attacks, what kind of questions do you have about your policy and how you're protected? When you open that up, it's amazing. People will say, well, what happens if we do have a flood? And now you're having these really genuine, thought-out conversations about coverage and less about price. So while I hate what's going on in the world, I also understand that agents have a big opportunity to have a deeper conversation with people. Right,
because, as of this recording, we have had lots of extreme weather going on. And so, right, it's only natural that people would watch the news and see, someone's house being destroyed and wonder, would I have enough coverage, right? What would I actually be covered for if this happened here to me?
100%. And then, maybe they never really thought about it, but you're bringing it up and saying, well, let's talk about that. And that could lead to a great conversation on water sewer backup or the difference in flood insurance. Because again, just people don't know what we don't tell them. And they're not going to proactively, unfortunately, get online. And we don't want them online researching it, right? Because it's not their policy.
Right. Kelly, one of the things I know you also talked about is that one of the valuable things about another valuable aspect of these proactive renewal calls is that it helps you update contact information. Can you explain more about that and what the value of that is?
Well, it's always amazing to me because, we launch these proactive renewal calls and we kind of get pushback from the team, right? Because how are they going to fit them in their day? They're so busy. And we kind of say, hey, you have to kind of outlast the pain point. If you can get through 6 or 8 weeks, you're now ahead of the curve and your life is different. And it's kind of just like working out, right? For the first couple of weeks, you got to drag your butt to the gym, but you feel really good after.
Yes.
And, we have a lot of things that we do to help people down that journey, from other CSRs and account managers that have done it, and them motivating them and saying, we'd never go back, trust us. But the big aha moment we always have in the first week is I say, great, let's call your book. And I want you to document how many times you changed contact information to see if we should do this or not. And, there could be 5 to 10% that don't have a working phone number when they first make calls. We don't have email addresses. We don't have cell phones.
Right.
And so a recent client we just did this with, small agency, there's 3 people making the renewal calls. They updated 12 pieces of contact information in the first week. That's just for the people they spoke to.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it's like, so tell me why, again, we have to do this. Like, we've gotten to a place where we can't not do it, because otherwise we're just going to keep eroding the book of business.
What, in your experience, that actually brings up a question that I'm curious about your thoughts, which is, what in your experience is gets most in the way of agents making proactive renewal calls?
I think it's it's like kind of like the time warp of everything, where everyone's running around so busy that they feel like there's no way. And what happens is a lot of times agencies just don't break things down to math. So, in an average agency, you're going to make somewhere just say average 4 to 5 calls a day per person based on book size. And so people think calling every single customer, oh my gosh, there's just no way. Well, could you make 4 to 5 phone calls a day where you're going to talk to probably 40% of those people? And then people look around and they're like, probably.
Right.
And you say, well, that's your book of business. That's where you'd be at. And if we could then take it off and say, well, you'd be able to reduce some stress here, you'd have less running around, you could reduce remarkets. We just need you to hold tight for 6 to 8 weeks. Could you get through that? Yeah, we think we could. And that's the major pushback is, I think it's the structure of the program where it's just, hey, we've told people 1 million times to do it, doesn't happen, but there's no tracking, no accountability, no script, no, this is how you make the call, this is what we want you to review. There's just not a lot of structure because people are running around. And then the second part is, it's really hard to get staff buy-in. But if you have the right partners like, us, we have our ways to get them to buy in. And sometimes when an outside person's coming in, people they take it a little bit more seriously. Kind of like when your cool uncle told you something, you do it. But if your mom said do it, you wouldn't do it.
Right. Right. If your parents told you, it doesn't matter at all.
Yeah,
exactly.
And we have the agencies create incentive programs. Like, it's a whole 6-month plan of attack. It's not just one meeting. Here's your list. Go make calls, and then we'll talk about it later. There's a lot of structure and accountability. And once you get it into place, the train's running. You don't have to worry about it anymore.
The last thing that I want to discuss here in our time together, and you alluded to it earlier, but I wanted to dig into it a little bit more, is the importance of being able by being proactive, by making proactive renewal calls, the ability to find key issues, as you say, before they find you. Do you have any examples or just in general, like how this would work in practice?
Absolutely we do. I had an instance at an agency that's been doing them for years now, but we sort of just dove a little bit deeper and did additional training with them. Well, on the commercial side, somebody had bumped up personal property coverage. Well, they looked at it and said, oh, that's not enough. Client agreed, bump it up. 3 weeks later, they had a fire.
Wow.
Well, great news. It was an aquarium store. It was a fish, they did all coral and high-end aquarium stuff. And without that, literally the owner came into the agency and said, we would be bankrupt and have to shut down. There's no way. And, you look at that and you say, well, what had happened if they just auto-renewed or we didn't step in? And yes, there's some responsibility on the customer. But again, he sells coral and exotic fish.
Right.
Let's be honest.
Right. He's not an insurance
he doesn't
expert.
Know what he's looking at when his policy
Right.
comes in. Yeah. And, they don't make it super simple. There's not a little infographic that says, this is what this means. It's all legal mumbo jumbo and everything else. And so had Jane at this agency not stepped in, made the recommendation, this person's life would be so dramatically different today. And, whether it's the umbrella policy, whether it's life insurance, whether it's just making sure the wedding ring is on a personal lines policy. These are things that we have to just have an ongoing commitment to. And if we want to be different, we want to be better than the direct writers, we have to build that relationship with our community and with our customers to defend that. And, a lot of times agencies think new business. And I love sales. I think every agency has to be a sales organization. But you can also sell a lot to your current book if you have the right mentality, the right strategy, and the right plan.
My guest today has been Kelly Donahue-Piro from Agency Performance Partners and Agency Appeal. Kelly, this has been really great information. If people want to learn more about you or they want your help, perhaps, in implementing some of this, how can they go about reaching you?
Absolutely. Well, best bet is our website, which is agencyperformancepartners.com. You can also find us on almost every social media channel and reach out. We love hearing from people. And we're happy to engage with anybody, even if it's just you have a quick 10-minute question. So please reach out to us. We love talking to insurance agents. We have a weekly email blog that we send out too. So if you want to get added to that, let us know. And you can get some of these great tips and tricks directly to your inbox.
Kelly, thank you so much for joining me and sharing your words of wisdom.
Anytime. And thanks for having us.
Thank you.
By the way, our show notes and bonus resources can be found on spotoninsurance.com. Subscribe now so you don't miss a single episode.
Thanks for joining us.